Don't forget, ask a question on your Google slide about this chapter, Special Delivery. Chapter 6. Harriet Tubman's name is found in almost every book about American history. Other slaves who escaped the South are not as famous, but their stories of courage are just as important. Henry Brown was a slave who lived with his mother, sisters, and brothers in the big house on a plantation in Virginia. His master was not cruel, but in 1830, the master gave Henry away to his son. Henry was only 15. Now he lived in another town in Virginia. How he missed his family. Still, he worked hard for his new master. If he didn't, he would be beaten. A few years later, Henry met and fell in love with a slave named Nancy. She belonged to a different master. Both her master and Henry's master agreed to let them get married. Henry and Nancy were allowed to live together, and in time, they had 3 children. They felt lucky until Nancy's master lost a lot of money. Henry was worried. What if Nancy's master sold her and their children? Sadly, that's exactly what happened. Henry watched his wife and children being led away. They were going to a new master in North Carolina. Henry knew he would never see them again. He felt like his heart had broken in two. For weeks, Henry was numb with grief. Things like this could happen because he and his family were slaves. He refused to be a slave any longer. He had to be free, to be able to go where he wanted and do what he wanted. But how? Henry thought about it and came up with an unusual idea. He would climb into a large wooden box. He would have someone he trusted mail him to an address in Philadelphia. When he stepped out of the box, he would be free. First, he ordered the box. It was 2 feet 8 inches deep. It was 2 feet wide, and it was 3 feet long. Henry wouldn't have much space inside it. Think about at school, those squares on the floor. There would be 2 squares across and 3 squares wide and 2 feet tall. Imagine how small that would be. The box was lined with a soft green fabric. That would make the trip a little more comfortable. He would carry a small bag of water and some biscuits. Holes in the box let in enough air. Henry spent $86, about half of all the money he had, to pay for the shipping. So many things could go wrong. Henry could be hurt or crushed in the box. He could be discovered. He could be sent back and punished. But Henry was determined. I think he had grit. A friend of Henry's was a white abolitionist named Samuel A. Smith. He agreed to help mail Henry. Next, Henry needed an excuse to stay home from work. He got a hold of a bottle of strong acid used for cleaning metal. Henry poured the acid on his hand. He burned his skin to the bone. It hurt horribly. But now he had a reason to stay home from work. Smith, who was a doctor, bandaged Henry's hand. They agreed to meet the next morning, March 23rd, 1849, at 4 in the morning. Early the next morning, Henry met up with Dr. Smith. It was still dark out. Henry climbed into the box, and it was nailed shut. The box was going to be sent to another abolitionist, William H. Johnson, who lived on Arch Street in Philadelphia. On top of the box was written, "This side up with care." Henry's box traveled north by wagon, railroad, steamboat, and ferry. At one point, he landed upside down. He could hear the sound of the waves. That meant he had to be on a ship going to Washington, D.C. Being stuffed inside the box was terrible. Blood rushed to Henry's head. His face felt hot. His eyes hurt. What if his head burst open? But he did not move or make a sound. At last, the box was delivered to the office in Philadelphia. 4 men, all abolitionists, were there to greet it. One man tapped on the box. "All right?" he asked. "All right, sir," was Henry's reply from inside. The men used a saw and a hatchet to open up the box. Out stepped Henry. He had been traveling for 26 hours. Remember how many hours are in a day? 24. So if he left at 4 in the morning, it would be 4 in the morning again, and then 6 in the morning. Whoa. He was so happy to be free. He sang a hymn from the Bible. Henry was given clothing and food. Then he took a walk outside in the fresh air. How good that air must have felt. Later, Henry became a speaker for the Anti-Slavery Society. He was given the nickname Box, and from then on, he always called himself Henry Box Brown. He wrote his story. It was published first in Boston in 1849 and again in Manchester, England in 1851. When the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 was passed, Henry fled to England. He was 100% safe there. He continued to speak out against slavery in his new country. He married a white woman and began a new family. In 1875, he came back to America with a Family Magic Act. No one knows where or when he died, but his brave and daring escape became part of the history of the Underground Railroad. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850. If runaway slaves were caught in any state, north or south, they had to be returned to their masters. Abolitionists called it the Bloodhound Law because of the dogs that tracked down escaping slaves. These slaves could not ask for a jury trial or to speak on their own behalf. In addition, any person aiding a runaway slave could be put in jail for 6 months and fined heavily. Law officers who captured a runaway slave were entitled to a bonus or a promotion.